القرآن حل ليالنا بالقيام أهلا أهلا بالصيام يا رمضان يا رمضان شهر الرحمة والغفران مرحب مرحب يا رمضان أهلا أهلا بالصيام. You told me you were here for 30 days to shower us with mercy just like rain.
Assalamu alaikum sisters, and welcome to today's session on decluttering your mind for a deeper connection with Allah SWT. I'm Tanzeela Majeed. I'm a marriage and parenting coach for Muslim women and also a teenage coach for young Muslimas. I've been running programs for over 13 years to help Muslim women and teenagers get a handle on their emotional health so that they can be free from any personal issues that are coming in their way. You'll notice that my video is off. That's because this is uploaded onto YouTube where I don't share my video. If you'd like to connect with me on a deeper level where I do share my video, you can get free trainings on marriage, parenting, and discover a teenagers program on the link that's down there, muslimahfuel.com/more. And that's my website, which facilitates a more female-friendly environment for myself that I'm comfortable sharing my video on. So let's get started on today's session. Today we're going to dive into 3 key points. The first thing is how mental clutter is created and where true peace and tranquility truly comes from. So when we're walking into Ramadan, we want to be able to gain the most out of Ramadan. We want to be able to have that mental clarity. So looking at the clutter is important and figuring out where we can actually become peaceful enough that we can connect with Allah, inshallah. And we're also going to look at how your connection with Allah is built and nourished. If we can hit the nail in the head and we know exactly what to do to connect with Allah, then we're going to hit the ground running, inshallah, when Ramadan begins. And the third thing we're going to cover today is the only place in which we can truly worship Allah. And we'll look at that in a moment. So let's jump into how is mental clutter created? You know what I mean by mental clutter, right? When our minds are so chaotic and so busy and there's so much on it, we can't sift through all the things that are running through our minds. That's mental clutter. How is it created? How does it end up there? Well, in order to answer that question, we're going to have to look at how our mind works. If we can understand how our mind works, we'll understand how clutter is created, and then we can reverse engineer that to get rid of the clutter and come back to a peaceful mind. So here's how it works. The core thing we have to understand is that thoughts and feelings are so connected that they are like 2 sides of the same hand, meaning they're almost like one, right? Feelings always come from thought in the moment. This is a law, a principle that is the core of understanding how our mind works. When we have a feeling, it's always coming from thought in the moment. And that's exactly how clutter is created. When we don't realize this connection between feelings and thoughts, that's when our minds start to become a bit chaotic. Let me explain how that works. If you look at that picture of the log, if it hadn't been split through the middle, that's kind of like our feelings and thoughts, because they're like one. Whenever you have a feeling, you will have a simultaneous thought, right? But when we create this split between feeling and thought, then when we have a feeling, let's say we have a feeling that's feeling upset, for example, right? So when we're feeling really upset, in reality, in the true sense, it's coming from thought. But if we don't see it that way, we don't see the reality, if we get caught up in an illusion, then we will start to think my upset is coming from this or that person or this situation or that situation. And all of those possibilities that we've created in our minds, they start to occupy our mind. In reality, the upset was coming from thought, our perspective, our thinking in that particular moment. But we've started to create these stories about where our upset is coming from, and those stories take up space in our minds, and that space gets cluttered. It gets cluttered because we're not aligned with the reality of how our mind is working. So clutter is created when we don't realize this psychological reality of how our minds work. And it starts to look like something else is creating our feeling. It starts to look like all of these other things in our mind. They're very important to hold in our mind because they're creating these horrible feelings inside us. That's how it starts to look, even though that's not the reality. And by doing this, by moving away from this reality, we lay the foundation for a stressful mind, for a busy mind that's full of chaos and full of distraction. So this is what happens when our minds feel heavy. And you know what it's like when you have you're trying to think, but you can't think because you're thinking of millions of things at the same time. And you just can't gain that clarity of thought. That's clutter. And this is how it's created. Now, why is it important for us to understand the reality of our minds today in this session? Because we're talking about Ramadan here. We're trying to prepare for Ramadan. So why is this understanding about the reality of our mind, why is it important? Well, if we want true peace and true tranquility, then we have to know the source of it. We have to know where to go to find that peaceful mind, to find the place in which we can just think of Allah and connect with Him much deeper. We have to know where to find it. And there are many people in the world, whether they're famous people or celebrities or people of power, people of status, and they have so much at their disposal that they can utilize to go and find peace. So they do. They might try and climb Mount Everest. They might try and be the most famous person in the world. They might try and buy this and buy that. And we know from their realities that they don't find peace there. They don't find happiness there. And that's why they'll then jump on to the next thing. So, their goalposts are always changing. It's like, I want this because it's going to make me happy and I'm going to find peace. So they go and get it. And when they get it, they realize that's not where peace is. That's not where tranquility is. So then they change the goalpost and say, okay, it's that thing that I need now. And they're forever changing their goalposts. And this might even resonate with you because we do this, maybe not on such a higher level where people have power and status and they can do really big things in the world, but in our own lives, sometimes we look at our marriage or our children or whatever aspect of our lives it is, and we think that we're going to find something there, something external to us. But that's not where we find our peace and tranquility. And when we do have that peace and tranquility, it's so much easier to connect with Allah. So this is why it's important for us to understand how our minds work and how we can gain that closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This hadith, which I'm sure you've all heard, the Prophet ﷺ said, this is the hadith of intention, the reward of deeds depends upon the intentions, and every person will get the reward according to what he has intended. So you know what that means? Our connection with Allah, our worship of Allah is an inner game. Connecting with Allah begins with the inside. That's what it means. So when we connect with Allah, when it's inside, how is it that we can reach out to Him? It's via thought, right? When you think of Allah, you connect with Him. When you intend to do something, like the Prophet ﷺ said, when you're intending something, what is an intention? And is it an intention is when you think of it inside you, you're deciding inside you, you're focusing yourself inside yourself, and that's done via thought. So whatever we do, it's the core of it, the weight of it, the essential part of it is actually inside. Even if it's something on the external, you could be, feeding people iftar, right? In Ramadan, inshallah, when it comes. If you're feeding your children, your family, or somebody else food in Ramadan, you are getting the reward of their fast as well. We know that. And that's what drives us to do those things. But it starts from inside. Our intention, our connection with Allah, our worship is from within. And that's where we will get our reward from. So the purer the intention, the more lofty and greater the intention, the greater the reward. So this is an inner game. And when we have a cluttered mind, it makes it so much harder to connect with Allah. When our mind is cluttered, we have to sift through all of these crazy, chaotic thoughts, all the things that are like, jumping in front of our way and trying to grab our attention. And our attention is so spread out over all of these thoughts. And we have to get through that in order to think of Allah. So a cluttered mind makes it harder to connect with Allah. And knowing, excuse me, excuse me, knowing how our mind works naturally gets us closer to Him. When we understand how our mind works, this is what happens quite naturally. As we understand that our feelings come from thought, then all the other unnecessary things on our mind, they slowly, we start to see how unnecessary they are. We start to see how they're not linked to the reality of how our mind works, and they begin to drop off just slowly. The more we start to see the reality and get deeper into how our mind works, those unnecessary thoughts begin to drop off. And as they drop off, we're left with a quieter mind. We're left with more clarity. And the more clear our mind is, the easier it is for us to get closer to Him. And this is what my clients, when they come to me, they might come to me for marriage issues, they might come to me for parenting help, whatever it is, and it could be anything else that they come to me with. But what tends to happen, and so many of them have said this, is that their connection with Allah deepens so much because of this. This is why this thing that I'm sharing with you today is what I do with all of my clients. This is something we have to go much, much deeper. And of course, I can't do that in today's session. We only have 30 minutes. But when we do go deeper into this understanding, our connection with Allah only gets stronger and stronger because our minds become quieter and we gain more clarity. So knowing how our mind works naturally gets us closer to Allah. And there's only one place that we can truly worship Allah. There's only one place. It's not in the past. It's not in the future. It's in the present moment. That's the only place we can worship Allah. When our minds are consumed with things of the past, we're kind of like stuck in the past. We're not really, because we're still here, but our minds have gone into the past and we're so consumed by it, overwhelmed by it, and our thoughts are literally just in thinking about the past only. And that's it. And when we're in that position, we are not in the present moment. We're not here. We are not connecting with Allah. This is the only place that we can connect with Allah, when we truly think about Allah in the here and now. And the same thing with thinking about the future. We might be consumed with worry about the future. We might be thinking what might happen, and we might be coming up with all these stories of what may happen in the future. And whilst we're doing that, we're actually not here. And because we're not here, we cannot connect with Allah in this moment. So in order to connect with Allah, we have to be present. Not stuck in the past, not stuck in the future, but here in this moment. Now, we've talked about decluttering your mind, and you might be thinking, right, I need to declutter my mind. But I'm going to say decluttering your mind doesn't have to be a thing to do. It's not something you have to now go away and do, right? A bit like decluttering your house. A lot of people are going to recommend that we declutter our houses so that we can be prepared in Ramadan, and there's less things to declutter and there's less things to sift around and sort out physically, right? And that's a great thing to do, but not when it comes to your mind, because trying to get rid of thoughts is counterintuitive. If I was to ask you to, if you decided you're going to declutter a room in your house, what would you do? You'd go into the room and you'd start touching the things that you need to declutter. You'd pick up things, you'd organize things, and you'd engage with the things in that room. That's what you have to do if it's physical, not when it's psychological and mental in our minds. Because to do that, That would mean you have to go into your mind and start rethinking of things and trying to organize thoughts. And what that actually requires is for you to start thinking all over again. And that's just going to add even more thought onto an already chaotic, busy mind. So that's not how we want to do it. Instead, and this is key, realize the role that thought is playing in your day-to-day life. That's it. Realize the role it's playing. When you realize, when you're feeling a feeling and you start to pay attention to, oh, that's why I'm feeling it. I just realized that I was thinking all these nasty things. That's why I'm feeling so upset. And you just notice it. And as soon as you notice it, you will start to, those unnecessary things, they start to drop. And you'll also notice how to get closer to Him, how to get closer to Allah. You'll start to notice how to truly be grateful to Allah. You just see something and you instantly connect with Him via thought. That's how it works. And this works for every relationship, by the way. This works for whether it's connecting with your spouse, whether it's connecting with one of your children or all of your children, or doing things at your workplace in a way that brings more clarity into your mind. This works for every relationship. As I said, when I have clients, it doesn't matter what they come to me for, this transforms every aspect of their lives. Because the role that thought plays in your life is also, it's where your experience comes from. So if you want to get closer to Allah, this is what we need to focus on. It's how to get closer to Him, and that is via thought. Now, here's some examples. If a person is feeling angry, so when you're feeling angry, see the angry thought that's behind that anger. So rather than getting caught up in our anger, if we can see the angry thought almost objectively, as if you're outside of yourself, and you can read the thought that's going on in your mind that's bringing about the anger. When you notice that thought, there's something that happens to your anger. It's not as overwhelming as it was before. It begins to lessen because you start to see the reality. Now, this is the initial stages. And of course, there's a much deeper place that you can get to the more you understand this, right? And let's take this example of stress. When you're stressed, the stress is like, it can be running inside your body and you're feeling all this rush inside and the anxiety that might come with it. All of these things are happening. But when you can see this stressful thought for what it is, it's a thought. When you can actually realize it and insightfully see it, that's when the stress begins to come. That's when you start to realize, it's all going on in my mind and this is driving me crazy, and it begins to lessen. So via thought is how you're going to get closer to Allah. And that's how reminders work. When you listen to an Islamic reminder, right? You might be listening to some sheikh on YouTube or something. If your mind is engaged, then you are thinking of what the sheikh is saying. You're actually thinking of those thoughts. And as you think of them, you connect with Allah. But have you ever been like, you've had a YouTube video on and the sheikh's saying something, but your mind just travels off into some other place and you're absorbed by different thoughts? Well, what's happening? Are you feeling close to Allah? Are you actually engaging with what the sheikh is saying? No, right? So the only way to connect with Allah is when we are engaged with our minds and actually thinking about Him. If we understand this, then we can be in worship so much more before Ramadan and in Ramadan, because we'll know that our worship is dependent upon us thinking of Him. And that's why Allah talks about remembering Him. Remembering Allah, doing the dhikr of Allah, is not just on a tasbih. It's not just by our tongues. Remembering is to remember, to be mindful, to bring Allah to mind. That's how we get closer to Allah. Now, what we've looked at in this session today is becoming aware of our thoughts. When we are aware of our thoughts, our mind begins to gain clarity, right? Now, this is a process, and if we begin it now before Ramadan begins, then we can gain so much more out of Ramadan, right? Just notice this as you go along in your day-to-day life, even now, in your day-to-day lives. Just pay attention to what is it that I'm thinking about. So if you feel a feeling, you will discover that there is a thought on your mind, and that's why you're feeling it. And the more we become aware, the more you can start to sometimes choose not to think certain things. It doesn't always work because we don't have full control of our minds, of course. Mind control is a totally different thing that I go into in my sessions. We absolutely don't have time for that now. It doesn't mean we can control our minds and control our thoughts, but the more we become aware of our thoughts, certain things start to happen. Certain clarity begins to come and our minds begin to become quieter, right? So that's becoming aware of our thoughts. You can start to practice that now before Ramadan in your relationships with your people, with your family members and other people around you, and you'll see a difference. And also when you're with Allah. Like, you don't even have to raise your hands and make dua to him. You can become aware of him instantly before your hands even come out, before your words even come out of your mouth. You can already be engaged in worship with Allah by a thought. The other thing that we spoke about is the realizations that we start to have in our minds. I'm calling them realizations, but it's this insightful understanding. It's the insights, if you like. It's the wisdom that comes from the transformation that comes from actually reflecting, pondering, and realizing. Now, this is not just for Ramadan, but there's so many things we can realize about Ramadan. If we can, first of all, like I said, become aware of our thoughts. If we can engage with our thoughts and get closer to Allah, we're already in worship of Him. We're already remembering Him, right? That will bring about a lot of realizations in our lives. All this running around we sometimes do in Ramadan, because we're trying so hard to do the external, like making iftar for a group of people is not always easy, right? There's a lot of things that go into it, from the grocery shopping to the planning to the beginning the prep. And then one of the things that, once you've actually made the food, you can't even taste it unless you're not fasting, of course. But if you're fasting, you can't even taste it. So the worry about, are they going to like this, are they not? There's so many things that go into it. And then at the end of the day, what you've done is you have fed them and opened their fast. So externally, it looks like one outcome. But the whole time you were preparing for that one outcome, all of that can become worship. And of course, running around getting the grocery and everything is rewarding. There is reward in that. But you can enhance that reward and gain a deeper relationship with Allah. Because if you can think of Allah as you are doing these things and be engaged with Him via thought, then we have enhanced our worship of Him. We have raised our intentions for doing those things, and we have raised, inshallah, our reward as well. And the other thing I think is quite important to say is there's another realization we have to have. When we look at other people and we see what they're doing with their kids, and we see what they're doing with, decorating their homes or creating activities for their kids to do, and we can see all of that in other people. But what we don't realize is what I am doing can't be quantified by just the external. If my home is not decorated, if I've not got fancy activities for my kids lined up, that doesn't mean my worship is any less. That doesn't mean that my Ramadan doesn't hold as much reward as everybody else. So when you quantify what people are doing, it's not really quantifiable in the way we normally would be able to do with other things. And that's why even in Ramadan, Allah says the fasting person's reward lies with Allah. Allah is going to decide what reward you have. So the most important thing is to hit the nail in the head. Get to the core and build your relationship with Allah from within, from inside. And that you can literally be in a room of people talking, or your kids are asking you this and asking you that, and you're answering them, but your heart is engaged with Allah. Your thought is directly connected with Allah. And these are the realizations that start to come when we focus on what's going on in my mind. How can I get this quieter mind? Just by reconnecting with Allah. Like I said before, you don't have to go and declutter it. You don't have to go in and sift out and weed out all these thoughts and get rid of them. Ignore them and focus on Allah and focus on your thought. And that itself will bring that quieter mind. And this last point I want to make here before I share an ayah of the Quran with you is the Ramadan shopping trolley or shopping cart. Now, I'm from the UK, I'm from Scotland, you can probably tell by my accent. So I call it a trolley, but I know many of you might call it a cart. I want to share something here with you. Imagine this. Imagine I was to say to you that if you were to go into a supermarket that sells everything, let's just say it sells absolutely everything that this world can provide, right? So it's got tech in it, it's got clothes in it, it's got furniture in it, it's got everything in it, right? And you go into this supermarket, and if I was to say to you that there is a time of the day that you can go in and put whatever you want into your trolley, fill it up, even just heap it up as much as you can, fit it in your trolley, and it's all free. And if that was true, actually true, like you could really do that, if you could really walk into a supermarket and do that, right? How many of us would be like, okay, I'm going to go and get my free trolley worth. I'm going to go in, select all the things that I want and need, stick them in the trolley, put things in for the kids and all of that. And I'm going to come back with my free trolley. If that was true, I'm pretty sure that all of us would take our time out and do that. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that it is kind of possible in two ways. And the first way, which applies all the time throughout the whole year, there is a time of the day that you can get something for free. And the way it works is you wake up at the Tahajjud time and you make dua. Now, this precious last third of the night that Allah talks about, right? We know that's the Tahajjud time. When we make dua, Allah answers the dua. That's a special moment where Allah is like, whoever is asking, ask. And I know so many people who have woken up at that time and told of miraculous stories of their du'as being answered, because that's the special moment in time out of the rest of the 24 hours, right? And the same thing with Ramadan. Ramadan is that special month out of the whole year. So you have those 12 months, yes. And what happens in those 12 months, the other 11 months, should I say, those 11 months is very different to what happens in Ramadan. In Ramadan, it's miraculous. You do the same smile and you get rewarded so much more. You pray the same two nafil that you would pray out with Ramadan, but it's so much more in Ramadan. Everything is amplified. So when we walk into this Ramadan as if you have your Ramadan trolley and you're going to put in as much as you can for this duration, for this month, for these 30 days, so that when the 30 days are over, you've stacked up so much more in this 1 month than you would ever get from the rest of the months, even if you tried. Like, you can try and smile for the rest of the year and you're not going to get the reward that you would have got in Ramadan. So let's walk into this month, inshallah, all of us, with our shopping trolley ready to put in as much as you can and amplify how much we think of Allah, amplify how much we make dua to Him, how much of the external deeds that we do, whether that's feeding people, whether that's praying, whether that's reciting Quran, all of those things, do as much as we can in this 1 month. And if we can see it that way, that gives us a motivation within our minds to do as much as we can. And I leave you with this last verse of the Quran, where Allah says, "Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." This is where we get our peace. It's through remembering Him, truly remembering Him, which is via thought. And this is where we get our comfort, our rest, and our peace and tranquility. And this is where we get the deeper connection with Allah. May Allah give us the ability to do this before Ramadan begins, so we can hit the ground running as soon as Ramadan starts. Now, if you would like to connect with me more deeply, and yes, I do have my video on in these trainings. You can find all of these trainings on this website of mine, muslimahfuel.com/more. I've got marriage training, parenting training, teenage girls coaching, and if you want to get onto the WhatsApp community, you can request to do that via email as well. So this is a more female-friendly environment because it's my own website and I can send these trainings to you via email. So if you want to connect deeper, this is where you can find out more about myself. I pray that we all have an amazing Ramadan, and please remember all of us in your du'as, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.